Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you've been listening to Point of View or been reading some of the articles we post on our website, you know my next guest, Dr. Walter Williams. Matter of fact, yesterday we posted his column on culture and social pathology. Well, they've collected many of his columns over these last few years and put them into a book, America, Contempt for Liberty. It's about 435 pages, published by Hoover Institution Press. And we're going to chat with him for a few minutes about a few of the columns that are in that book and some of the things that I know he's addressed in the past. He has been on the faculty of George Mason University as a professor of economics since 1980. He's also served as their department chairman. He's also served on many other faculties: Los Angeles City College, California State University, Temple University. He sat in occasionally for Rush Limbaugh, and he joins us now by phone. So, Dr. Walter Williams, always a delight to have you on the program.
Good afternoon.
Your book is broken into 7 categories. You have the Constitution, politics, race, education. Also talk about such things as environment and health, international issues, and potpourri. So I'll try to pick just a few because we only have a little bit of time with you. But on the Constitution, I think anybody that reads the more than a dozen different columns that you've written that fit into that category would have to recognize that you would agree, and I would agree with you, that when we apply the Constitution, you use the number, and I think that would strike a lot of people, almost 3/4 of what Congress does in terms of taxes and spends is on things for which there is no constitutional authority. Please explain.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the powers that the founders and the framers of the Constitution gave Congress are the enumerated powers, and they're found in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. And they include things like national defense, post office, post roads, and the coin of money, and some other things that are there. It's roughly about 21 things that Congress is authorized to do by the United States Constitution. Now, nowhere in the Constitution does Congress have the authority to take the earnings of one American and give the earnings to another American to whom they do not belong. That is roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of all federal spending, whether it's handouts to farmers, bailouts to big business, welfare payments, education, and so many programs, and it's just no constitutional authority. And they try to manufacture constitutional authority by saying, well, gee, it's in the General Welfare Clause. Yeah. Well, that is utter nonsense.
Yes.
And matter of fact, Madison and Jefferson both said that they talked about the General Welfare Clause. It says the General Welfare Clause does not entitle Congress to do anything they want, only those things that are enumerated. But however, the problem is, we cannot blame politicians for our problems. Politicians are doing precisely what the American people elect them to office to do, namely to use the power of their office to take what belongs to one American and bring it back to them. And any politician who does not do that, or any politician adhering to the values of the founders, will not get elected office by today's Americans.
You know, one of the things I want to point out is when they look at the General Welfare Clause, the largest expenditure oftentimes is the Department of Health and Human Services, and a lot of it has to do with welfare. And I think, Dr. Williams, a lot of people would say, well, shouldn't we help the poor? But you have one of your columns here in which you even remind us that not only did James Madison speak against this, and it's one thing to speak against it when you're actually the architect of the Constitution writing the Federalist Papers, but then later when he was president himself, he actually vetoed a bill which would have been pretty pale in comparison to what we do today, because his argument again is as important as it might be to help those who are in impoverished circumstances, we don't have a constitutional merit or authority to do so.
That is absolutely right. Now, so far as helping people in need, I believe that helping one's fellow man in need by reaching into one's own pockets to do so is praiseworthy and laudable. Helping one's fellow man in need by reaching into somebody else's pockets to do so, I think is worthy of condemnation, and it's despicable. And for those Christians among us, I think that we need to recognize when God gave Moses the commandment, thou shalt not steal, he did not mean thou shalt not steal unless you got a majority vote in Congress.
Good line. Let me move on because, again, you got a section on Constitution. I want to give people a flavor for the one on politics, so I thought I'd pick out the national Ponzi scheme. I remember a number of years ago when, of course, Governor Perry was running in one of the debates. He said the Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, but also a lie. He said, well, it's obviously a Ponzi scheme, and that the Securities and Exchange Commission probably would shut it down if it weren't mandated by the federal government. But you also say that it's a lie as well. And you went back to look at some of the original documents of Social Security and recognized that the government's been lying to us ever since it passed.
That is right. The Social Security documents that was written in 1936, 1937, they actually say things like, the money that's in the Social Security that's taken out of your paycheck is put into an account for you. It is your money. Now, there are two Supreme Court cases that say that is not the case. That is, you don't have any, Congress does not have any obligation to make Social Security payments because it's not your money. It's part of the general tax revenues. Then they also said that your Social Security tax would never be more than, I forget the particular number. It could be like 1 or 2%. Mm-hmm. And today you're talking about, if you include the so-called employer share, you're talking about 12%. But see, here's part of the tragedy of it, is that the Social Security system is headed for collapse. According to conservative estimates by the Social Security Administration, let's say in 2030 or 2040, in order to pay today's promises in Social Security to people who are 65 and older then, the Social Security tax alone will have to be 31%. And that's not including, other taxes, the income tax. But I doubt whether Americans in the 2030, American workers are going to be willing to tax themselves at 31% to take care of some old people. So the system is going to collapse. But here's the major tragedy of it, is that any congressman talking about doing something to avoid this collapse in 2030 or 2040, he's going to get run out of town by people who are recipients of Social Security. Because and what do they care about 2040? Because the congressman, he'll be dead in 2040, and the people who are receiving Social Security right now, they'll be dead in 2040. But that congressman, rather than worrying about 2040, he ought to worry about 2016 when he's up for re-election.
Good point. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk for just a few more minutes with Dr. Walter Williams, and we've covered a few of those chapters, and again, there's so many, but again, we'll come back and talk about maybe race and health care and guns, because after all, we are aware of what's going on in South Carolina. We'll be talking about some of that the rest of the program, but I wanted to give you a chance to hear just a few of the things that are in his book, American Contempt for Liberty. It's published by the Hoover Institution Press, 435 pages. If you've always wanted to collect all of the various columns and the insight of Dr. Walter Williams, that's the book for you. We've got lots of great information about him and ways in which you can order that if you're interested, and we'll continue our conversation with him right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
After the attack on America on 9/11, Stephen Coughlin was brought into the government to research and present information on Islam, and especially about Sharia law. His presentations were so effective that the special operations community dubbed them red pill briefings. This was a reference to the iconic scene in the movie The Matrix. Neo was given the choice of taking the blue pill and going back to his reality, or taking the red pill and seeing the world as it really is. Sadly, the forces of political correctness eventually prevailed, and Stephen Coughlin was sent packing, and the red pill briefings in government ended. But he has continued to speak out on what he has discovered and collected this material in his new book, Catastrophic Failure: Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad. He explains the religious foundation of Islam. One foundational principle is the Islamic doctrine of abrogation. Earlier chapters, known as surahs, in the Quran are replaced or abrogated by later chapters. When Muhammad was in Mecca, he was a prophet and spoke of peace. When he was in Medina, he was a warrior and spoke about war and jihad. He also explains the philosophical underpinnings of groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood. He provides ample footnotes to illustrate the connection between Islam and terrorism, and he provides documents that show the detailed plan of the Muslim Brotherhood to infiltrate into government and American society. His goal is illustrated by the subtitle of the book. It is time to pull away the blindfold and see the threat of Islam as it really is. Government policies and political correctness may be blinding members of the military and personnel in the Department of Homeland Security to the real threat we face. We must reject the blue pill. It is time for all of us to take the red pill and see the world as it really is. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for just a few more minutes Dr. Walter Williams, professor of economics, author, columnist. He's at George Mason University, and his new book out, which collects all sorts of columns, many of which we've talked about on this program before, but all in one place, American Contempt for Liberty. Dr. Williams, if we can, maybe go to your column on should black people tolerate this? And the point you're making is obviously we should be concerned about the deaths of Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or Freddie Gray or whatever, but you point out that roughly 7,000 African Americans are murdered every year, and 94% of the time the murderer is another black person. And it does seem to me that we need to focus on that issue, and you really asked the question, why is it that the African American community puts up with this?
Yeah, I don't know, and yeah, I think it's absolutely awful. The conditions under which many black people live in cities like in Baltimore, for example. These black people are not huddled in their homes at night, afraid to come out on the street, serving meals on the floor so they won't get, so their children won't get hit by stray bullets. They're not worried about the policemen doing that. They're not worried about the Ku Klux Klan doing it. It's other black people. And I think one of the tragedies, I'm almost 80 years old, but one of the tragedies and one of the things that many Americans, including black Americans, are misinformed about is that most of the pathology that is seen in black communities is entirely new. The huge murder rate that's entirely new. Or the illegitimacy rate, 72% nationally, black babies are born out of wedlock, and in some cities you're talking about 90%. Well, in in 1938, only 11% of black kids were born out of wedlock, and 3% of white kids were born out of wedlock. The number of black kids living in two-parent families is roughly 1/3. That's entirely new. In 1880, and I point these statistics out in my book I wrote several years ago, Race and Economics.
Yes.
In 1880, 70 and 80% of black kids live in two-parent families. So all I'm saying is that most of the pathology that we see in black communities is entirely new, and I believe a whole lot of it has to do with the growth of the welfare state.
Yeah, and I think Daniel Patrick Moynihan warned us of that, did he not?
Oh, and when Patrick Moynihan warned us that the illegitimacy rate, this is 1965, it was slightly less than 30%, and people criticized Moynihan for being a racist.
Yes. Well, again, lots of very good columns on race, but I wanted to at least maybe pick out two more categories, and one is the issue of health care. I mean, we have a decision coming down from the Supreme Court soon, and you ask a question, is health care a right? It does seem to me that some people, matter of fact, a lot of politicians today are saying health care is a right, but in typical Walter Williams style, you say, well, suppose if an individual, for example, in the one case you use, suffers from diabetes, has no means to pay a laboratory, so again, he begins to say, I have a right to those pharmaceuticals. I have a right to the kind of laboratory work and all the rest. And you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem fair. But somehow when it goes through the hand of government, we begin to think that people have a right to all the medical care. Now, we should provide it. But the point is once you make it a right, that becomes a constitutional right, and there are all sorts of problems that ensue, correct?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the tragedies, one of the points I make in some of the columns, is that when you say something like a person has a right to something that he did not produce, since there's no tooth fairy or Santa Claus giving the Congress the money, that means that someone else does not have a right to what he produced. And when people talk about rights, rights are something that exists simultaneously. That is, my right to free speech confers no burden on you except that of non-interference. But if we use my rights to free speech the way we talk about rights to health and rights to housing and stuff like this, well, my right to free speech will require that others build an auditorium for me to talk to, give me a microphone, and give me a TV studio and things like that.
Yes.
But people are using the word rights improperly. What they mean when they say people have right to health care, what they really mean is that they wish people could afford as much health care as everybody else gets. And by the way, finally, people who are medically indigent throughout most of our history, they got it through voluntary, they got it through charity, they got it through churches, they got it through doctors giving up their time to take care of indigent patients.
Well, again, I wanted to ask you at least one more question before we go, and that is, in light of the shooting that took place in South Carolina, and of course some of the previous ones as well, you have a column there, Are Guns the Problem? And you remind us of something I remember I did one time on a TV program and got pilloried for, because I said, there was a time in which we actually had NRA-sponsored rifle clubs. I know of individuals that traveled on a bus with a rifle, then set it in the corner, didn't have ammunition in it and everything. We used to have guns at school, and we never had a shooting there. And this idea that the guns are the problem, I said, no, I think it's the kids that are holding the guns, pulling the trigger. What are your thoughts?
Yes, they're the problem. And then also, you just look at Sears and Roebuck's catalogs back in 1915, 1920. You could buy a gun at Sears Roebuck, and there wasn't all this shooting. But the issue with, why we have the Second Amendment, the framers of our nation gave us the Second Amendment, they didn't have any idea about, they're going to give us the right to keep and bear arms so we can go duck and deer hunting. They explicitly said to enable the American people as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny and government.
So again, I think when in light of kind of what's unfolding here in South Carolina, maybe we should come back and recognize as tragic as the shooting was in the church. And we're going to spend a fair amount of time on our second hour today getting into that in more detail. Dealing with guns is not necessarily the best way to go if we are really concerned about the high levels of violence in our society today.
We have to deal with immorality. That is, there's been a massive decline in immorality and in morality in our country, and and this represents some of the topics in my columns, and it represents the title of the book, American Contempt for Liberty. That's a moral issue, and there's been a moral failing in our country.
Well, just before I let you go, I wanted to maybe get your thoughts about the future in America. You've been watching some of these candidates. Do you find any candidates that maybe you see that actually believe in the Constitution, that believe that we should begin to rein in the size and scope of government, or are we just going to head down that same road that you've been talking about?
As I said, that any candidate who would have the constitutional values as Madison and Jefferson or Grover Cleveland to say, well, I'm going to veto any bill that's unconstitutional and explain why, the American people wouldn't elect them to office.
So again, one of the things we're facing. Again, Dr. Williams, we appreciate the good work that you do. And again, the book is entitled American Contempt for Liberty. We also have a link to, of course, your faculty page there at George Mason. People can find out a little bit more about some of the other things that you have produced, books and videos, as well as, of course, your regular column. And as you heard, we posted your column from yesterday, Culture and Social Pathology. So thank you for having or creating the conversations we have so often without you. It was good to have one with you today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Okay, Dr. Walter Williams. And again, if you are interested in his columns, and I certainly am, and I only touched on a few, 400 pages of columns, I think you're going to benefit tremendously. And again, the book is entitled American Contempt for Liberty. Well, we've already set the table with a lot of issues, so let me just mention that we will now open up the phones. I've got some things to say about what happened in South Carolina, and in the second hour today, we're actually going to have an expert in the studio who has spoken to us before about how churches can protect themselves against individuals like this. So we're going to talk about this in the broadest sense, but then we also want to talk about some of the solutions that have been put forward. One of my columns, which I've posted today, Charles Cook, Don't Blame the Second Amendment. And of course, right now we're having all sorts of people saying, well, if you want to prevent what happened in that South Carolina church, well, the simplest answer to that is to actually implement very strict gun control laws. Out of this, of course, has also been a desire to pull down the Confederate flag there in South Carolina. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how, interestingly enough, the mainstream media just had difficulty assigning political identifiers, political parties to who actually put those flags up there and also who took them down. So we'll try to clarify a little bit that as well. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And I just heard from Walter Williams that he's got a column coming out on the Second Amendment. So when that one appears, we'll post it here on the website as well. His column today on culture and social pathology is up. And of course, I just mentioned the article just a minute ago that we have posted on Don't Blame the Second Amendment. And if we have time, I think Jay Richards did a great job. When to Doubt a Scientific Consensus in light of the papal encyclical. Lots to cover, and in this last half hour of the first hour, we give you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. Give us a call, 1-800-351-1212.
It's an amazing story, and you played a part in making it happen. Jeremy Dyes remembers as a third grader sitting in his mother's car listening to this program.
Point of view allowed me to see the world around me in a different way than I would have seen it otherwise. It certainly made me think about how do you defend your faith in public and what's the best means of doing that. And for me, outworking of that was just to go right into law school.
Today, Jeremy defends religious freedom as senior counsel for the Liberty Institute, and he's not alone. Kerby has met numerous people in their 20s and 30s with something in common. Point of view equipped them to live out the faith and make a dramatic impact. Your support today will raise up another generation to change the future. And right now, every dollar you give will be matched up to $15,000. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If I could join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things we certainly encourage you to do on a regular basis is pray for America. And for those of you that receive an email from me, about an hour and a half ago, you probably received in your inbox the Pray for America. And I talked about the fact that you heard on the show last Friday. And I again want to thank Penna Dexter for covering on Thursday and Friday when I was out in California, meeting a lot of our listeners to KYCC. But when she was there, they were giving an update on Chaplain Wes Motter. And of course, he is that commanding officer or his commanding officer, I should say, is one that is trying to force him out of the Navy. And again, the reason for that was because Chaplain Wes Motter actually spoke specifically as a chaplain about what the Bible has to say about sexual activity and also about homosexuality. And that was enough to get him forced out. Of course, they also talked about this other woman who is convicted at a court-martial for putting a Bible verse on her computer screen. So, first of all, I would certainly encourage you to read that. And this is a focus there on Pray for America, on the military assault on faith. And that is certainly a matter of prayer. And of course, the topic we just addressed in passing, and now we'll probably address a lot more, certainly pray for the church there in South Carolina, pray for other churches, and pray for this issue of racial reconciliation. So we will continue to put out these prayer alerts and encourage you to take action in that regard by praying, but also we many times encourage you to take action if indeed you want to address some of these issues. Let me address this issue of how the Confederate flag got drawn into all of this. As you well know, because of that shooting, there have been calls by various officials in South Carolina and even across the country to remove the Confederate flag from the state capitol grounds. Well and good. But what I thought was kind of interesting, and this comes from our people at Newsbusters, the Media Research Center, is that it illustrates, again, one of the things we talk about so often on this program, and that is the bias of certain kinds of news reporters. And this one, I think, illustrates only so well something I've seen before. If a particular politician does something good, and that individual's a Democrat, you hear about it. If a politician does something poorly or bad or immoral, we somehow don't ever hear what their political affiliation is. By contrast, if a Republican does something good, sometimes we don't even hear about it, or if we do, we just hear the name. But if it's something that is really bad or newsworthy, then we, of course, attach a label to it. And here is a good example of that. They have quite a few, so I'm only going to read 2 or 3 to make the point. But one of the points was, again, on ABC World News Tonight with David Muir. They did not mention the flag's history around the state capitol. CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley and NBC Nightly News highlighted how the flag returned to the Capitol during the Civil Rights Movement, but never explained it any further. Let me use one example. CBS correspondent Adriana Diaz put it this way. Quote, the Confederate flag began flying on the Capitol Dome in 1961 in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement. In 2000, it was moved to the Confederate War Memorial on the Capitol grounds and is the only flag that cannot be lowered without a legislative vote. So after the shooting, when other flags in the State House were lowered, the Confederate flag flew high. You cut some of the others, and I can go through the long, long list, but I thought it was kind of intriguing that they never really pointed out who it was that put it up or who it was that actually had it moved. And in case you're not familiar with it, in 1962 really is probably when that took place. The flag was raised over the state capitol by Fritz Hollings, a Democrat, who then was the governor, later, of course, served as the senator. But interestingly enough, later on, it was taken off the state capitol by then David Beasley, who's a Republican. But the point is that they never mention the names, never mention the political affiliation, and after a while, you just simply say, okay, that's kind of what I've come to expect. But nevertheless, love to get your thoughts about the removing of the Confederate flag and also maybe the way the press covered it. I think at least on Fox News, Brett Baer's comments were certainly appropriate, and he asked some questions of Charles Krauthammer, who was, in a sense, reacting to a fellow panelist, Wesley Lowery. And he said, Nikki Haley has done everything in a favor by giving cover because the standard Republican position is that it should be up to the people of South Carolina. Well, he says, she speaks for the state. The two senators who are Republicans have spoken for the state, so everybody is covered as a matter of policy. He says, if I were a South Carolinian, I would do exactly as she did. I would have done it 5 years ago. He goes on to point out something else, which I think really is also relevant to the discussion. This has nothing at all to do with what happened, and had the flag not existed or not been on the grounds of the Capitol, this massacre could have happened in any case, but it's the standard liberal impulse. Something happened really bad, so there's got to be a problem and there has to be a solution. We must do something even if the something is entirely irrelevant. Gun control being a second example here because they had all the laws that Obama wanted, had them passed, and it would have made no difference whatsoever. But that's the instinct. And again, sometimes the reaction to some of these actions that have been taken are to lower the flag, which I think was long overdue, and I certainly agree with what Charles Krauthammer said, or to try to change the Second Amendment. And this is why we've posted this particular piece here by Charles Cook, Don't Blame the Second Amendment. He said, last Wednesday evening, a 21-year-old white supremacist shot and killed 9 black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina, in one of the most horrific terrorist attacks of recent years. Because of where it happened and why, it represented an assault not only on a group of people, but on American history itself. As a result, both the grief and condemnations were more pronounced than is typical. At first, the reactions were almost exclusively sentimental, the vast majority of mourners electing to focus on what the killings meant. But as the dust settled and the news sank in, many turned to more practical considerations, predictably the fractious question of America's unique firearms laws that pushed to the fore. Because I am well known for my staunch support of the Second Amendment, I received a number of critical emails and tweets, both asking me what I thought and enjoining me to change my mind. Typically, these took the following form, quote, the United States Constitution is amendable. In fact, the Second Amendment itself is an amendment. It may have made sense in 1791 for the people to be armed, but it does not now. Americans should come together and excise this provision for the good of all, unquote. Well, he goes on to say real quickly, I have spent a good deal of time during the last 3 years making the moral, legal, and philosophical case for the right of people to keep and bear arms, and I shall not repeat that brief here. I think also Walter Williams made the case briefly, and as a matter of fact, he has a column coming out, so probably we'll post that in the future. But he went to say, I shall not repeat my earlier observation that nothing that President Obama has proposed so much as intersects with what happened in Charleston. Instead, I would like to explain briefly why I think to blame the Second Amendment itself, and for that matter to propose its repeal, is not only to miss the point, but to expose the raw flaw or the root flaw in the way that the skeptics view the whole question of firearms in the United States. He says it's certainly true that the Supreme Court has ruled only recently that the Second Amendment protects an individual right, and that in doing so, it has preempted the sort of stringent gun regulations that obtain in, say, Australia, France, or Britain. It is true, too, that it is only since 2010 that the right has been applied to the states. And yet, outside of a few pockets, it is the case that the practical consequences of that jurisprudential recognition have been limited. Critics of America's lax gun laws like to complain bitterly that nowhere else in the developed world can civilians buy a semi-automatic AR-15 and attach a 30-round magazine to it, that nowhere outside of America can civilized people carry a gun upon their person when they go to the mall, and that were Germans or Indians or New Zealanders to keep revolvers in their car, they would be arrested. He says this is mostly a fair assessment of American exceptionalism in the realm. But this, the key, is exceptionalism is primarily the product of contemporary political pressure and not of constitutional arrogation. Were the Supreme Court to pretend tomorrow that the Second Amendment does not mean what it plainly means, very little would actually change. Yes, San Francisco, New Jersey, and Chicago might attempt to ban handguns or to refrain from offering concealed carry permits or to ban gun stores within their city limits. Washington, D.C., too, would revert to its former lockdown. But other than that, the country would look roughly the same once everyone had taken stock of the ruling. As any honest observer knows, the now-defunct federal assault weapons ban of 1994 was not struck down by activist judges, but by legislators who declined to renew it when it expires in 2004. Similarly, all but a few handful, perhaps, of the concealed carry regimes that are now in force were instituted by state legislatures, not by courts. As for the purchase permitting system, mandatory waiting periods and ammunition recording requirements that once intruded, they were removed by popular demand, not by legal appeals. And so the point he's making is that even if you pass those laws, I think the nation would continue to go on, and frankly, some of these tragedies might still take place. Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about safety in your church, but as we come back, let's take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
As you well know, we spend a fair amount of time talking about prayer around the table here, and we have our Pray for America campaign. I just sent out an email to pray for some of the things happening in the military, and so we thought it would be good, since we've been able to connect up with Representative Randy Forbes, to talk about a new initiative that he has. He is the founder and co-chairman of the Congressional Prayer Caucus. It represents, of course, the Virginian 4th District. He's a graduate of Randolph-Macon College, as well as the University University of Virginia School of Law, attends Great Bridge Baptist Church, and is going to be talking about this initiative known as Faith It Forward. Representative Forbes, always great to have you on the program with us.
Thank you, Kerby. It's so good to be with you today.
Let's talk about this initiative because, first of all, we have been encouraging people to be in prayer. We'll, in the second hour, even been talking about, and we'll be talking about what has happened in South Carolina, and we'll be talking about church safety, but we also have encouraged people to pray about the Supreme Court decision coming down and even what has been happening in the military. But you have an opportunity here to actually put together an initiative that would unite the country around celebrating the positive aspects and impact of faith in local communities. Tell us more if you might.
Kerby, as you know, our faith is under attack quite a bit, not just in the United States, but around the world today. And part of the reason is because of the narrative that people have about people of faith. And it's a narrative that oftentimes is carried by the mainstream media, but it is normally not accurate. And one of the things that we do not talk about enough are the really good things that people of faith do to change the world around them. And so we have from the Prayer Caucus and from Congress now this initiative that we launched today called Faith It Forward. You can go to facebook.com/Faith It Forward. We have a Facebook page, all kinds of social media. And what we're doing, Kerby, is collecting stories from across the nation. Groups are supporting us. Churches are supporting us. Members, elected officials are supporting us. Putting on as a clearinghouse, stories of what people of faith are doing to change their communities and to make this country a better place to live. So we have people that are working, helping with adoptions, people that are going into prisons and turning things around, people that are feeding the hungry. And we don't tell those stories very much because most of these people are very humble and they don't want the recognition. But it's time that we change that narrative. This gives us an opportunity to do that.
Well, again, you can go to facebook.com/Faith It Forward, and you will see that this is the announcement here of an opportunity to really talk about some of the really powerful examples and maybe in many cases untold stories of individuals of faith making a positive impact in their community. And so your goal is really to collect these stories and to maybe help people understand that even if it's not covered by the mainstream media, there is still quite a bit that is being done in the name of Christ or even in the name of other religious traditions to make the world a better place.
Kerby, that's right. And the other thing is to let people understand, our country was built on that kind of foundational principle of faith. And we believe it's the foundation that will help us go through the challenges that lay ahead as well. But people need, as they see these stories, to understand, just imagine if we pulled that faith component out of our country today, look at the impact that it would have. And I think as people see these real-life stories, all of a sudden they start saying, oh, my gosh, faith really does have a place in our country. But if it has a place in our country, maybe it has a place in my heart as well. And your viewers can go on there and add their stories. They can tell these stories. We're hoping this creates a different narrative as literally hundreds of thousands of people around the country gather together to share these stories and to let people know what people of faith are doing to make this country a better place.
Again, you can find out more about the Prayer Caucus as well by going there. It's forbes.house.gov/Prayer Caucus. And, of course, Randy Forbes is the co-chair along with James Langford. But also you can go to facebook.com/Faith It Forward, and we'll have some of those links for you. And if you have a story in your community, I hope that you'll sit down, take the time to write it up. Maybe if you've got a picture that can go with it, tell the story. And that, I think, is going to be a real encouragement. And it's so necessary because, as you well know, Congressman Forbes, all we seem to hear these days is doom and gloom. And so every once in a while we can come in here, as we did the other day with John Stonestreet, and hear all these stories about people with Christian convictions and the impact that they're making in the prisons and education and the community. This is broader because it looks at any kind of faith tradition. I hope that in many cases people will take the time to go to that Facebook page, to like it, and then to see what they can do maybe to add one of those stories and encourage everybody. So I really appreciate you making that possible.
Well, Kerby, thank you. Thanks for all you guys do. And, we hear so many people talk today about all the bad news. This gives us a chance to talk about some of the good news, and we just hope people will do that all across the country. But thank you for helping us and supporting with that initiative.
Representative Randy Forbes, let's do it again. Let me, if I can, real quickly take a few phone calls. We'll continue to have those go into the second hour, but we'll start out with Adam. Adam, what would you like to add to the conversation we've had today?
Yes, thank you so much for taking my call. I appreciate it. In reference to the Confederate flag and in what's come up because of what happened in Charleston, I think a lot of times we miss an opportunity to educate. That there, all of a sudden, everybody's sort of pointing the finger at a flag as if somehow, now's the time we need to do something about it, rather than saying, okay, well, let's find out the true history of this. What does this really mean? Do people realize that it was originally a battle flag for the armies of North Virginia, and it was once part of the Georgia flag, and why that happened and that it was removed, and the true history, sort of like what you talked about earlier about how not really giving the full story of how of its transition at the Capitol in South Carolina, of why it moved and who moved it. I think we miss an opportunity to educate. I think when we learn the truth about history, it is a lot harder to demonize history.
Well, again, there are some very sad chapters in American history, and I'm willing to tell the full truth in that regard as well. But it's a little bit like a column I've got coming out next week where they want to take Alexander Hamilton off the $10 bill. And I said, that caused only a little stir. Well, it would cause a major controversy if people knew that Alexander Hamilton wrote 3/5 of the Federalist Papers. He was the first Treasury Secretary. He saved the nation from a debt crisis, and on and on and on. Same kind of thing here. You recognize that there are some kind of knee-jerk reactions, and I think the governor did the right thing pulling it down. If it's causing people a problem, fine, but I think we are really dedicated here to teaching history. And next week we're going to come close to the 4th of July, so I'm going to put on my George Washington outfit again maybe, and we'll do some teaching, and we'll see if we can teach some people a little bit more about our history. And so I appreciate, Adam, you getting us started in that regard, and thanks for calling today.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
We'll take some more phone calls in the second hour, but I also am going to have Jimmy Meeks in studio. We've had him in a couple of times before, but when you see what happened in this particular shooting scenario in South Carolina, which was obviously racially motivated, there are other examples where it's motivated by an anti-God bias or an anti-black bias or an anti-Christian bias. And we, I think, need to maybe have Jimmy come in for just a few minutes here and help us understand what churches can do to protect themselves. And he has been at the forefront of this for many years. He's been a police officer and then has actually worked quite a bit in this whole area of helping churches begin to have the type of protection that they need, and has actually put together this award-winning docudrama on the subject, Faith Under Fire. So we're going to spend some time learning from him again, and this is something that any of you in church leadership need to sit down and listen to. So let's take a break. We'll continue getting into some of these very important topics today. All that coming up right after these important messages. Once again, we encourage you to pray for America, and I think Bob's got something to say about that right now.
It's an amazing story, and you played a part in making it happen. Jeremy Dyes remembers as a third grader sitting in his mother's car listening to this program.
Point of view allowed me to see the world around me in a different way than I would have seen it otherwise. It certainly made me think about how do you defend your faith in public and what's the best means of doing that. And for me, outworking of that was just to go right into law school.
Today, Jeremy defends religious freedom as senior counsel for the Liberty Institute, and he's not alone. Kerby has met numerous people in their 20s and 30s with something in common. Point of view equipped them to live out the faith and make a dramatic impact. Your support today will raise up another generation to change the future. And right now, every dollar you give will be matched up to $15,000. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, we're going to spend some time asking a very important question that you in your church need to ask, and that is, what if a shooter comes in the front door? What are you going to do? Do you have any kind of preparation? We'll get back to, of course, what has happened in South Carolina, but the bigger issue, and the one that I hope will be very practical for all of us, is what we can do. And so we bring back to the microphone, and in studio with us today, he had an evening shift, but I think even though I only got 2 hours sleep, I know you'll do this well. Jimmy Meeks, a police officer for 33 years, been a minister for over 40 years. Actually, he and his wife were actually married in First Baptist Church of Dangerville, Texas, which actually was the site of the first massacre back in 1980. It's hard to believe that.
35 years ago yesterday. Greg.
And just amazing. And, of course, the video I mentioned just a minute ago, Faith Under Fire. And we've had you on before, but when we hear about what happened in Charleston, South Carolina, we think that's the only shooting. This is, what, the 30th? Something like this year?
We've lost, I know that right now we're at 20 violent deaths that have occurred at church and faith-based property this year, Kerby, and that's through the middle of February, so we haven't added in March, April, and May, so we're probably looking at 30 or 40.
Yeah,
but I do know it's over 570 since 99, which is just as many as the schools. Now, those are not just shootings, they're stabbings, strangulations, brutal attacks that resulted in death. A mother and her 3 children were run over at a church in Philadelphia and killed last July, so these deaths just keep mounting, and they come in various ways.
This one, of course, was racially motivated. The individual, 21-year-old white supremacist. But it almost doesn't matter what the issue is, because it may be anti-Semitism. It may be hatred of African Americans. It could just be hatred of Christians in general. Could be just acting out. Could be some people that maybe are just not even emotionally balanced. But if you add all that together, we have a death toll that frankly, the media doesn't talk about too often. We do here on Point of View, because we bring you in to try to address it.
Yes, sir, and it's, I was on CBN last year, 700 Club, and they said, how come we're not hearing about this? I said, well, we are now, because I'm here in the studio with you, so it's people like you, Kerby, and usually the Christian media. We've been trying to get the Christian televisions, to talk about this. It's not a pleasant subject, but when something like this happens, you mentioned that movie Faith Under Fire. A friend of mine was 11 years old when he saw that, Kerby. He started going downhill that day. He killed himself last year. He just never recovered. And heart goes out to Charleston, because the grief is just beginning. When you have things like this happen, the pain lingers for years and years. Some never recover.
Let me again encourage you to pray for those parishioners there and others that are affected by this. But we're going to move on, because I really want to provide some ideas and some guidance for a lot of these churches. You've been in a number of churches holding these seminars. How are we doing? Are churches any better prepared than they were, say, a couple of decades ago?
Oh, we're waking up. That's the best 2 words to use, waking up. And I get asked this all the time. Time Magazine asked this a few days ago, what can we do? And the answer is always the same. Everything you do every day is what you do after you wake up. So churches have to wake up to the reality that this violence is not going to stop. If anything, it's going to get worse. You mentioned a while ago some of the various motivations, but about 100 of them are domestic violence. A man gets angry at his wife, goes to the church, and just shoots her, or other things that he's done to take her life. So I do believe we're waking up. There's more resources available on this than ever before all over the country. I mean, I've driven 13,000 miles this year doing these seminars, so I'm encouraged to see that churches are waking up, that what Jesus said in Matthew 10:17, be on your guard against men. They will harm you in the house of worship. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much, I don't know how I missed that verse all these years. My degree's in religion, but wow, what a reality we're seeing. And, of course, overseas, they're going through this every day.
Yes, well, they certainly are. And I think we can learn from our brothers and sisters overseas to recognize that we have been fortunate that when we talk about persecution, it's with a small p, but sometimes persecution with a large P happens.
Wow.
And we expect the church to really be a place of sanctuary, and it oftentimes is. So we're not talking about every day, but it only takes one of these incidents in Colorado or in South Carolina, or of course, we've had quite a few right here in the state of Texas where we're broadcasting from today. So give us some guidance on what churches can and should do. It seems to me that waking up is important, but then having a plan. And you have them put together a plan. What does that exactly look like?
Kerby, you can't emphasize that enough. Football coaches and all the people in life that really succeed in some things, they go into games or into business with plans. You don't just wander in there and then try to figure out what to do. So you have to have what my friend Carl Chin says. He's been involved. He was working for James Dobson when a gunman showed up years ago, took him hostage, and then he woke up Sunday morning in 2007 and went to church, and the killer showed up there at New Life Church in Colorado Springs. And Carl always likes to say, intentional security. What are churches doing? I mean, sometimes I work on Sunday morning. There's about 40 churches in my city. I drive around. Not a soul is in the parking lot. We're not paying attention, and it's because of a mindset, as Colonel Grossman would say, who works with us in our seminars, that it's a mindset. Do you understand that we're losing about 2 people a month? About every 15 days, somebody's dying of violent death. Sometimes it's during the week, but you have to have that mindset and then say, how come we need to put somebody in that parking lot? Somebody needs to be paying attention. Somebody needs to be in the foyer. We've had a lot of. I knew of a church in this area, Kerby, where they, watched some people, got suspicious. The police ended up getting involved. They detained the man, and his criminal history showed that he had a history of making bombs, bomb making. So, what's going on here? So putting somebody in that parking lot patrol, and then somebody in the foyer that's looking for things we like to call DLRs, don't look right.
Yeah.
Left of center, some people call them, the things that you look for that somebody will do when they come into your congregation. If they don't fit, if they're not dressed like the rest of you, and of course that's fine. Welcome everybody. Jesus said, whosoever will, let him come. But you have to train yourself, that sheepdog mentality, watching for those wolves that will come in. This kid in South Carolina sat there for an hour.
Yeah.
People say, how can that happen? I said, hey, Judas had the Last Supper with Jesus before the Bible says the devil entered in him and he betrayed him. So just that DLR, what are you looking for? Do you have somebody in the parking lot, somebody in the foyer? Who's by the kids? They chased a man out of a church in East Texas 6 months ago. They caught him walking down the hallway with a machete in both hands. In the kids' area, what was he doing? Fortunately, he didn't do anything, and they chased him out, and the police went after him. But just getting that mindset that, hey, we have a group of people here that we ought to love enough to protect. Let's get something in place. There's so many resources available. Start watching your people. Some of these deaths are just unbelievable and undescribable, and they're just stunning.
Yeah. We're going to take a break, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the DLR, don't look right, as well as some of the action items that we can take. And if you'd like to ask some questions about church security, we certainly do give you that opportunity as well. Jimmy Meeks in studio with us today. And of course, I know some of you want to also address some of the issues related to South Carolina, everything from the Confederate flag to trying to maybe increase the number of laws against guns, which I think are all peripheral issues. But the bigger issue is whether you're in South Carolina, whether you're in Georgia, whether you're in Oregon, whether you're in California, whether you're in Maine, you have to begin to think a little more creatively and with a little more intention, I guess is a better way to say it, about how to provide protection for the people in your church and your particular office complex. You also mentioned Dave Grossman. He's one that over the years has kind of watched what's happened in some of the schools, so maybe we can learn some lessons from them as well. Let's take a break, but if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Jimmy Meeks in studio. We'll continue talking with him and you right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
After the attack on America on 9/11, Stephen Coughlin was brought into the government to research and present information on Islam, and especially about Sharia law. His presentations were so effective that the special operations community dubbed them red pill briefings. This was a reference to the iconic scene in the movie The Matrix. Neo was given the choice of taking the blue pill and going back to his reality, or taking the red pill and seeing the world as it really is. Sadly, the forces of political correctness eventually prevailed, and Stephen Coughlin was sent packing, and the red pill briefings in government ended. But he has continued to speak out on what he has discovered and collected this material in his new book, Catastrophic Failure: Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad. He explains the religious foundation of Islam. One foundational principle is the Islamic doctrine of abrogation. Earlier chapters, known as surahs, in the Quran are replaced or abrogated by later chapters. When Muhammad was in Mecca, he was a prophet and spoke of peace. When he was in Medina, he was a warrior and spoke about war and jihad. He also explains the philosophical underpinnings of groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood. He provides ample footnotes to illustrate the connection between Islam and terrorism, and he provides documents that show the detailed plan of the Muslim Brotherhood to infiltrate into government and American society. His goal is illustrated by the subtitle of the book. It is time to pull away the blindfold and see the threat of Islam as it really is. Government policies and political correctness may be blinding members of the military and personnel in the Department of Homeland Security to the real threat we face. We must reject the blue pill. It is time for all of us to take the red pill and see the world as it really is. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jimmy Meeks in studio with us, and an individual that has really talked a great deal about church safety. You, again, might want to look at the video, Faith Under Fire. He's been a police officer, minister, and we'll get into some of those phone calls in just a minute. But, Jimmy, my commentary just right now was on ISIS, and 15 miles from where this broadcast is originating from, just 15 miles from the studio, is where you have two terrorists come. It wasn't in a church, but it was in a public arena, and some of those individuals might someday want to come into a church. And here, fortunately, you had a police officer, which... he just had to be an incredible shot, because these two guys walk out. They come out of a car with AK-47s, and he drops both of them. But that just, again, reminds us that we're kind of in a seasons of violence, and there are people that are anti-black, and they're anti-Asian, and they may be anti-Hispanic, they may be anti-Christian, they may just be anti-God, they may just be part of a terrorist network, or it could be, like you said, a domestic dispute. But for whatever reason, we need to begin to pay attention to what might happen in your house of worship.
Yes, sir. And you really hit it on the head there, Kerby. What's going on is that, and I've never seen so much. I've been a police officer for 34 years and 5 months. There is so much anger out there. I mean, almost every call I'm going to, somebody's mad about something, road rage. And to take a biblical worldview point on this, that the scripture says, don't let the sun go down on your anger.
Right.
Ephesians 4:26. 4:27 says, and don't give the devil an opportunity.
Yeah.
And Jesus said he's a liar and a murderer. So when you allow that anger to come in and you don't deal with it, it may evolve into bitterness and hate. And then, like Cain, he was angry, and then he got bitter, and then he killed his brother. Mm-hmm. The scripture says, don't be like Cain, who killed his brother because he was of the devil. So these people that that get this hate, like this kid in South Carolina and others who just have this hatred toward whatever. Some men have it toward their wives. I mean, 1,000 women are assaulted every day in this country. So this anger builds, turns into hate. It opens the door to the dark side, and that'll come and mess with you. Paul said we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but people who are filled with hate and toward particular races or men toward women or what have you, eventually they do become violent, and that's the threat that we're under. Is there's so much hatred. I mean, we have a lot of hatred going on.
And one other thing that crosses my mind is, we're encouraging people to pray. And I would encourage people to pray for those in law enforcement, because you actually going to be starting a radio program.
You brought that up.
Okay, let's talk about that, because, this will be a radio program, maybe some other listeners. And
I need $4 million right now. Can we raise that, you think, in the next?
But you're really trying to minister to fellow police officers,
I was talking to a police officer the other day in Ferguson, Missouri. I know you know where that's at.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just so down, bummed out. I've been talking to cops all over the country, and I just had this idea. I used to have one. Old Tom Dooley used to run a radio show out of his, remember Tom, out of his studio. But here in a few weeks, if you monitor our website, sheepdogseminars.com, eventually we're going to, here in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to go back on the radio and preach. The affiliate stations are in Washington, California, Alabama, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina. We're going to be all over the place, like a 30-minute show. We're just going to preach the gospel.
Yeah.
And have a bunch of cops on and stuff.
Encourage other people in law enforcement. You did mention your website, sheepdogsafetytraining.com is one place to go, and you can see a picture of Dave Grossman as well as Jimmy Meeks. And let me take some phone calls along the way. You're welcome to take some calls or make some comments or add or delete anything that we've said. So let's go to North Carolina, WGNN. And David, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm curious. I mean, they want to add more laws. Why can't we used to have the laws that we used to have, like registering our firearms? So when people, most of your crimes, by the way, the biggest part of your crimes are done by people with unregistered firearms.
So you want to register them with what, the sheriff department?
Yeah, the sheriff department, police department, whatever. Not only that, but then when those people are caught with those unregistered firearms, whether they've done any damage or not, they need to be immediately locked up, because you can figure they've already stolen them to start with from somebody. I know they had 5 or 6, maybe 7, let's see. 357 Magnum, 45 Colt Gold Cup, a 22 Browning semi-automatic, a Thompson Contender single shot pistol. I had 4 barrels for that. And I've had a 22 rifle, a 12-gauge shotgun. I think every one of our firearms ought to be registered with your sheriff department and police department, whatever. And they need to have a special people set aside for doing this. So when they can go in there and they can pull them up when they find a firearm, find out it's been stolen, they can not only get the man for the damage that he's already done with the firearm, they can also get the man that stole the firearm.
Okay, I got the point. I just wanted to give you a chance to make the case, but I really wanted to focus more on church safety. But any comments real quickly?
Well,
since you're in law enforcement.
Kerby, Jesus said murder comes from the heart. China has mass killings all the time that are done with machetes and knives. And the fact of the matter is there's somewhere around 250 to 300 million guns in the country. It's almost a useless argument when I'm not giving up my guns as a police officer. I'm not going after them. It's just not what causes violent deaths and murders. We had them for hundreds of years before anybody came up with the idea of, wow, we'll call this a gun, a rifle, a pistol. Murder comes from the heart. Jesus said that. So what we got to do is get folks to register their heart. We need to get out there. This is where the church comes in. We got to advance the kingdom and get some folks' hearts changed, because if you took all the guns, which will never happen, we'll still have murders. We did.
Yeah,
I read the other day, Kerby, England's pretty much gun-free, but gun crime is up over 80%.
Yeah.
So people are getting a hold of these. There's gang problems. They only have 62 million people in England. We have 320 million, and it's just one of those things. You got to choose your battles. We got to go after people's hearts. We will never win by getting them all. And I don't want to go register guns with the police. I mean, we know enough about each other as it is. And at some point, you got to have some. sense of privacy.
Again, sometimes I do things where we talk about the police surveillance, and people come away thinking I'm anti-police. I got you in here today, and obviously I'm not, but there is a sense in which I don't want to trust any one individual or any one bureaucracy or any one group too much, because after all, we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But Chris in California, you wanted to address that issue, so listening on KYCZ, what would you add to the conversation?
Actually, he just hit it on the head, what I was going to say. It's changing the heart of a person. I was reading an article last night that in Europe, I forget what country, but they have gun control there, and their stabbings have increased dramatically. And, I remember, a few years back, I was at my friend's house, and some guy wanted to kill his wife and filled his car with gasoline and plowed in through her garage. So, it's one thing isn't gonna change it. It's the person. You know what I mean? So, he pretty much nailed what I was going to say, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you making that comment. Let's, if we can, maybe help some of the churches figure out what would be the next step. And I thought for a minute, just before we take our break here, when people go to your website, this is a way in which a church says, okay, Jimmy, you've convinced me. We probably don't have a whole lot in place. And you have these seminars that you would be glad to hold in that community so that individuals could understand a little bit more about what they could do in their church. So when they go to sheepdogsafetytraining.com, which button do they click on and what do they ask for?
Well, we offer a lot, Kerby. We're going to, if I may throw out there, we'll be, I'm bringing Colonel Grossman with me. We'll be in Bozeman, Montana. I believe you're on in Montana. Mm-hmm. I saw in September, then October, we'll be in Amarillo, Texas. And the end of the month, we'll go to Philadelphia. And what we do, and churches have to realize that, Colonel Grossman likes to say, men don't rise to the occasion. They sink to the level of their training. Those two boys that took on the shooter in Dangerfield 35 years ago, they were World War II veterans, or Red McDaniel was. These were trained men. Mm-hmm. So we encourage the churches, put together your team and just start thinking it through. If you're awakened to the fact that things like Charleston are here, they've been here for a long time. The Dangerfield was 35 years ago. And other things that have happened down through the last century. Start putting people in the parking lot. Start training. You can call the local police department. Say, hey, police departments, the phones are ringing off the hook. And they have to come for free. You don't have to pay them. Mm-hmm. And we encourage churches, Kerby. We get this all the time. I'm not sure that's in our budget. Listen, if you need to get that in your budget, take up an offering. We're talking about people's lives. My friend Carl Chin likes to say, isn't it a shame that a praise and worship band will practice more on a Sunday morning for songs that will be forgotten in 20 minutes? But the safety team, if you mess up, it could be around for a very, very long time. Intentional security. There's so many resources. Google them. But make sure you do cover your perimeters. That parking lot, that foyer, station people. Anytime you come together, you've got to have people stationed strategically. There's a lot of things you can do, but the shortcut to the website is to sheepdogseminar.com. That'll get you to the sheepdog safety training. Call us so we help people. I've had on the way to the studio today, people calling from Kansas and other places, Charleston. What do we do? Yeah. And it's not real difficult. It's just waking up to the reality that this is where we are. Let's start doing something.
Let's try to prevent another Charleston from happening.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons we're covering this. And we'll take some more phone calls after the break. 1-800-351-1212. Jimmy Meeks with us for a little bit longer. We'll be back right after this.
It's an amazing story, and you played a part in making it happen. Jeremy Dyes remembers as a third grader sitting in his mother's car listening to this program.
Point of view allowed me to see the world around me in a different way than I would have seen it otherwise. It certainly made me think about how do you defend your faith in public and what's the best means of doing that. And for me, outworking of that was just to go right into law school.
Today, Jeremy defends religious freedom as senior counsel for the Liberty Institute, and he's not alone. Kerby has met numerous people in their 20s and 30s with something in common. Point of view equipped them to live out the faith and make a dramatic impact. Your support today will raise up another generation to change the future. And right now, every dollar you give will be matched up to $15,000. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jimmy Meeks in studio with us today. Of course, we're talking about what happened last week in Charleston, South Carolina, but more importantly, the broader issue of what you need to do in your church or house of worship to provide safety to those people that attend. And we'll go back to the phones. We've got all sorts of things to share with you, but let's go to Texas this time, KBJS, and Mark. Thank you for calling today.
Thank you, Kerby. We were talking about this during our Sunday school class last week, and we have people come into our church each Sunday that we don't know, and we try to make them feel welcome and everything. You also have somebody comes in that you don't know, and they don't fit the bill. They don't look right. Something just says they're not where they're supposed to be, or they have the wrong attitude. And, we were talking about when they go to sit down that maybe we can have two of our men go sit with them. And if they're close, that gives us an opportunity to prevent the violence before it ever starts. I realize that with an explosive device, it won't help that much, but with a gun, a knife, or something of that matter, it would drastically decrease the number of people that get injured or hurt.
Very good idea. Jimmy?
That's a great idea. And that's what we call that DLR, sir. That's that don't look right. And you know, you have to get beyond the religious objection that will manifest in your mind when you think, I don't want to judge anybody. You're not judging. John chapter 2, verse 25 says, and Jesus trusted no man. I mean, why isn't that ever associated with those WWJD bracelets? We are not I'm alive today because I'm cautious enough as a police officer to know I don't have to trust anybody. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean I'm not loving or I'm not caring. Of course, welcome everybody into your church. But there's nothing wrong with you saying, I love the flock enough that if somebody comes in here and it don't look right, I'm going to take the necessary precautions. I have a cop friend who, when he's suspicious at a church, he just hugs that stranger, a big old bear hug, and looks for guns or anything else. I'm not saying you always want to do that, but he's just smart. I mean, people can be, Jesus trusted no man. Why haven't we talked about that verse more down through the years? So I commend you for your response, sir, when something like that happens at your church.
We'll go to Georgia and the Good News Network. Gene, thank you for calling today. You're on with Jimmy Meeks.
Kerby, this probably doesn't fit your DLR conversation right now, but my question is, why is everyone concentrating on flags and guns? Remember the old adage, garbage in, garbage out? Look at all of the movies.
Yes. The movies and the TV. Yes.
That's where the problem is, the games that these kids play, shooting people. You know what? That's garbage in. And I don't hear anybody addressing that. And that's my only comment.
It's a really good comment. And, your colleague, Dave Grossman, has been on this program many times, but then I think he got burned because then we couldn't get David Grossman on here for a long time. But he was the one that pointed out that, in Jonesboro, Arkansas, for example, this kind of Opie and Beaver Cleaver kind of kids had never shot a gun hardly at all, and yet they're shooting. Or the one in Paducah, Kentucky, again, he's getting headshot. You can just see he's almost programmed by the violent video games. And so
there was one report that the shooter in Charleston did nothing but sit around playing video games. I read it 2 days ago.
Video and drugs. I wanted to talk about, and instead we're talking about flags and gun control.
Got to go to the heart of the matter, but the Bible says in Proverbs, above all else, guard your heart, for out of it come the issues of life. We're letting a lot of stuff into our hearts, and video games are so addictive. I mean, what did we do before there were iPads and iPhones? I've seen people text each other that were sitting next to each other. I mean, this is unbelievable. But that stuff is going to sometimes can lead to criminal behavior if that's all you do. As Colonel Grossman says, these kids get points when they kill. And you get this mentality in your mind. And the video games, folks don't care. I mean, it is an issue. Once again, same thing about the guns. It's the heart. I mean, there's where I had a guy say one time, who do you think the battle will be in the Battle of Armageddon, Russia and Israel? I said, I have no idea. But I will tell you where the real Armageddon is today. It's in that space between your left ear and your right ear, known as your mind.
Well said.
That is where the battle is being fought all over the world is in the mind.
Before I take some more phone calls, let's talk about after effects. You know, you think about the shooting there in Charleston, South Carolina. This one girl pretended to play dead, and she's probably going to deal with this. But let's look at this. The Wedgwood shooting, which is just down the road, less than 50 miles from where this broadcast is. They go in and shoot the people there in Wedgwood over in the Fort Worth area. And you've had a chance to get to know these people, and years later, they're still dealing with the after effects, are they not?
Yes, sir. I did a seminar May 6 and 7, 2013. Dr. Al Meredith, the pastor over there, wonderful, incredible man who I saw on the news the other day was going to retire at the end of the year. But when I asked him 2 years ago, Dr. Meredith, I'm going to put on a sheepdog seminar. Would you speak at it? I will, Jimmy, but is there a chance you would do that here? Because we sure could use the healing. Wow. That was 2013, folks. Yeah. That's the shooting was September 15th, 1999, on what they called See You After the Poll.
Yeah.
And, a lot of, I was told by one of the victims of that shooting, he said, post-traumatic stress disorder broke out in the congregation. One of the kids who was injured took his own life.
Yeah.
A divorce broke out.
Yeah.
This is what a victim who was shot twice told me.
Yes.
Great people over there. And these things go on forever. Well, if you've never been victimized by a crime, you don't understand post-traumatic stress disorder. Obviously, the soldiers suffer from it. Over 20 of them are taking their lives every day. It's actually gone down. People like Colonel Grossman, who's written books on this, you need to understand that this is going to happen. And this is one reason we have to fight to stop the violence is because of the long-term effect it has. They're still hurting in Dangerfield, Texas. I told you earlier, one of my friends who saw it 35 years ago killed himself last January, just started going downhill. And when you see something that traumatic, when you see people, Kerby, I went to a scene where a little girl was murdered 2 years ago. And for the first time in my career, and I apologize. You're not used to having crying cops on your show, I know. But for the first time in my career, when I saw that little girl murdered, and I would go home at night and see my granddaughter, and in my mind, I would see that little girl.
Yes.
And I went to my chief and said, give me some counseling.
Yeah.
And I got a great chief, great department. And that's all I saw was just that.
Yeah.
And what that little girl in Charleston saw and what others are seeing every day in Chicago and what have you, this stuff goes on forever and ever. We're going to move on to the next event. Charleston is just beginning years and years of suffering and pain.
Wow. Well, again, be praying for those in Charleston, but also, as we said, 35 years ago, Dangerfield, 1999, Wedgwood. Some of these shootings are such ancient history that some of our younger listeners have never even heard of them.
Never even heard of.
And yet they're still feeling the after effects of that as well. Let's go back to the phones. Robbie, I think you want to add something to the conversation, so you have the floor.
Here in Georgia?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. I called in because I don't really know, and I'm sure there's probably other people out there like me. I don't understand the correlation between the Confederate flag and what's going on here. I thought the Confederate flag was the South, the rebels against the Yankees in the war. And I'm not understanding why all of a sudden it's this big issue, and it offends all these people. I missed it somewhere. When I was in high school 40 years ago, they didn't teach me that, so I don't understand what's going on in our country today with the Confederate flag. So I'm hoping that you can explain that so that others will know as well, because I thought it was prejudice between the North and the South, the Yankees and the rebels.
Sure. Well, and there are two issues. Issue number one is that it represents the Confederacy and slavery. And then second of all, I think it was really brought to the fore because this 21-year-old, by the way, you notice I never mentioned his name. I've always used that over the years. I never mentioned the name of the gun.
Colonel Grossman always says that. Don't mention their name. You can't in Canada.
Yeah, and I don't.
It's against the law.
But that 21-year-old, anyway, and we all know who we're talking about, it was pictured with those Confederate flags, and so that's what sort of brought it to the fore. But I recognize that there are individuals in the South that appreciate their heritage and believe that there was something worth fighting for in terms of the war between the states, or the war of northern aggression, as some Southerners will say. But this has come to be symbolized as something much more, and in large part brings us back to what NBC just never could cover when they were talking about this, or I'll use the one from CBS where Adriana Diaz says, well, they moved the flag from the Capitol Dome to the actual Confederate War Memorial, Well, the person that put it up on the Capitol Dome, as I mentioned before, was the Democrat Fritz Hollings, who was governor, later South Carolina, during the Civil Rights Movement.
Wow.
So it was seen as a way to be against civil rights and for segregation and all the rest. So I could do a lot better job, I think, of explaining it, but I'm coming up to a break, and I suspect as I open up the phones again after the break, we will certainly have some others that will perhaps do a better job of explaining that. But we also have a good question. One of our callers wants to know, well, what can we do inside the church? Can various security officers have concealed weapons and things like that? So we're going to come back and get, again, practical suggestions from Jimmy Meeks about what churches can do in terms of security. And we'll take those calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jimmy Meeks with us. Again, we're going to get real practical here because I can see some of them want to ask, well, what about weapons and all those kinds of things? So, Danny in South Carolina, let's get the conversation going. What would you like to ask?
Yes, sir. I was just wondering, y'all's opinion on concealed weapon permit holders carrying a concealed weapon to church.
Well, the issue you have in South Carolina, what I've read, is that it's forbidden at churches in South Carolina so far. That will probably change, but I think about 25 states now. Kerby's probably better answered at this, but about 25, 26 states allow that. Texas allows that. But there's a much bigger issue. Just carrying a gun to church doesn't mean, we were talking about this during the break, me and Kerby, that we're talking combat here. We're talking having to take a life. We're talking about you're in the back, he's up front, he's got the gun, the 300 people in the way. That's why the training and the practice has to come into play. And of all these violent deaths at churches, about 30 or 40 of them have been stopped by a good guy with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
But training is the real key. Men don't rise to the occasion. They sink to the level of their training, and just getting that permit, shooting targets that don't give you any resistance doesn't really prepare you for something that's going to alter your life and change your life. I knew a cop friend, or had a cop friend years ago who shot 2 people, and it changes your whole body. He saw the bullet, Kerby, come out of the gun, spin, and go into the body of the person he shot.
Oh.
And a lady at a church shooting, Fred Winters. Remember the shooting of Fred Winters back in March of 2009?
Yes.
She saw the bullet come out and travel. So there's so much trauma and so much post-traumatic stress that kicks in. So there's just a whole lot to it that we want to be trained. That's why they train the military. We don't hire these guys on Tuesday and send them to Iraq on Wednesday.
Right.
And we train them. So I think it's up to the laws that determine that, and your conscience. You know, I carry a gun everywhere I go, and my wife knows when we go to the restaurant, we're going to have to sit in the back, you know, and because Jimmy's got the gun, but I'm a police officer and I'm allowed to do that. And
yeah.
I joke with her, I'm the shooter, you're the shield, and I sure do love you for it, babe. And so you just need to be ready. That's a heavy question that probably Kerby can bring in. Colonel Grossman, I'll work that out some days.
Let's get Dave Grossman back in here, because he's certainly talked about his book on killology and how hard it is to kill another human being. I learned that, and he's the studies they did in Gettysburg and how they changed that so they would shoot at silhouette targets and all the rest so that they could increase the kill ratio. He was doing this for the West Point, and then he starts looking at these video games and saying, basically, we've just got a Marine Corps simulator that these kids are playing every day, and has been giving excellent, really expert testimony and very important testimony on some of these cases. So we'll get him back on that as well. And that kind of leads to another question from Georgia, WLPE. Is it Tanya?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your questions and make your comment. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, what is the likelihood that a Mr. Roof would have been stopped in the parking lot or in the vestibule of a white church, and for two people to sit down next to him? And what should a black church do when we see white people approach us on our parking lots in our vestibule? Do we sit two people next to them? Because in large part, what has attacked our churches have been the white people. They're not looking for Muslim Brotherhood or others. Those have not been our problem historically.
And again, it's going to be difficult just to try to spot who it is. As we heard from one of our other individuals, I think it was Mark, was talking about, okay, well, that person doesn't look like they belong here, but do we kick them out of church? No, we welcome all people into church, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I have to trust everybody. I like what you said about that. I mean, trust but verify, right?
Yes, sir, Kerby. Carl Chin, my friend, who's the expert, says,
it's tough.
The Bible says the horse has made itself ready, but victory belongs to the Lord. In other words, do all that you can. Fill the pots with water and trust Jesus to turn them into wine. You've had several calls from Georgia today. I think of Creflo Dollar's church back in October of 2012, 30 people in the chapel. One of the ministers is preaching. A fired maintenance worker comes in, terminated maintenance worker comes in and shoots him dead. October 2012. Georgia has had quite a bit of church violence. And funerals, I've seen several funerals where gangsters show up and shoot people, and they die while they're burying somebody.
Yeah.
And it's not black on black, white on black, white on white. It is simply it's a case of whose heart is bad, whose heart is dark, who is angry, who's bitter, and you just have to do the best that you can. Response is much slower than action, so you're just going to have to prepare yourself.
Sure.
Just prepare.
Well, and again, just some wise things. There was one of our guys came into another building that I was working in, and he had this coat, and somebody said, "Why do you got the coat?" And he jokingly said, which was a stupid thing to say, well, it's easier to conceal a gun in it, but
don't say that at the airport.
Yeah, and we said, you better not have said that at the TSA. But, the other day, one of the individuals that I know at our church wouldn't let somebody in because they had a backpack.
A lot of churches won't allow backpacks.
And they said, we need to look at your backpack. And he said, no, I'm not going to let you look at my backpack. And at that point, we said, okay, there's an issue here. Mm-hmm. It turned out it was an issue of privacy, but it could have been a lot worse.
Well, what are you doing bringing your backpack to church?
Yeah, okay.
Come on.
At some point.
And Kerby, some of these things have happened. The Salvation Army, Phoenix, Arizona last year, turned on a donated flashlight, and it exploded. A lot of things like that have happened. So we just have to exercise more caution. We've had a lot of people say, and the big thing that really hurts people, Kerby, I saw this on television last week in a local news channel when a pastor got on there and arrogantly said, we will not have any form of security here. We will trust the Lord. He will protect us. And I'm thinking, what did you just say? They just killed 9 people last night at a church who was trusting the Lord, reaching out. The pastor was at this group of only 12 or 13 people, loving on his people, reaching out, sharing the word with them as they did with that man when he came in. You know, so don't get religious. People always say, Colonel Grossman says this, Jimmy, or ask us all the time, Jimmy, why should we have security? Because you love your people.
Yes, because
you love them. I got a wife and 5 daughters and a son. I'll, as you would for yours, you would lay down your life for them because love, Paul said in 1 Corinthians, always protects. You know, when Jesus got arrested in the garden, he said, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. He said, that's me. Let my disciples go.
Yeah, let them go. Yeah.
Let him go. He was a sheepdog.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to take him on. I mean,
yeah, that's for sure.
He must have been something, and he is something.
Almost out of time, so that's why I wanted to mention that we do have your link to sheepdogsafetytraining.com, where you can just use the short acronym to it as well. But since we have the link there, just click on it. And then it talks about being sheepdogs. It talks about you have a church safety kit. You have a DVD that people can find. There's some other videos, but also, most importantly, they can see where you might have a seminar already. And as we mentioned, you know, people in Idaho and people in Montana that listen to us can go. And of course, you have some others in different parts of the country, so they can either see where a seminar is already taking place or schedule one. And I would encourage people to take the time.
We do the mini ones too, Kerby. Carl Chen and I, without Colonel Grossman, we'll come to your church. We'll show you what to do. We'll stay there with you a couple of days. And all you got to do is just provide me with a lot of donuts and coffee, and I'll hang around for 2 or 3 days.
You're just perpetuating the image everybody has of a police officer.
Can we edit? Are we on delay or something? Can't you push a button? But
well, you've done pretty well because I know you only got 2 hours sleep. These guys that work the evening shift or I guess the late shift there.
Midnight shift.
Oh, man. You know, and again, we appreciate those of you in law enforcement, and I appreciate you not only being in law enforcement, but then doing some extra work to help churches provide the security that we need. And again, our goal is to not have another Charleston. And so that's one of the reasons why we thought it would be appropriate to talk about this. So thanks for coming in, and go get some sleep.
I sure am. And Kerby, we tell all the sheepdogs, just if anybody has to die at your church, you make sure it's you.
Wow.
You get in there and you make sure it's you, and you fight for your people. The Lord is a warrior. You're a warrior. Fight for your people.
We're going to have Alan West in studio tomorrow, and then Chad Williams. So don't know how it's going to work out. We got a colonel in the Army and a Navy SEAL, but I'm sure they'll get along pretty well. And we're going to be talking about some of the military and also some foreign policy as well as domestic policy issues. I think you really appreciate that conversation as well. But we're just out of time. If you want to know more about Walter Williams or Randy Forbes or Jimmy Meeks, it's all at our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow.
It's an amazing story, and you played a part in making it happen. Jeremy Dyes remembers as a 3rd grader sitting in his mother's car listening to this program.
Point of View allowed me to see the world around me in a different way than I would have seen it otherwise. It certainly made me think about how do you defend your faith in public and what's the best means of doing that. And for me, outworking of that was just to go right into law school.
Today, Jeremy defends religious freedom as senior counsel for the Liberty Institute, and he's not alone. Kerby has met numerous people in their 20s and 30s with something in common. Point of View equipped them to live out the faith and make a dramatic impact. Your support today will raise up another generation to change the future. And right now, every dollar you give will be matched up to $15,000. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.